Welcome to Text on Text. This is Jed Sunwall. This is a special holiday edition of the show, by which I mean it's really close to the holidays and I don't have enough time to get this thing out the door, so I'm going to do this all in one day. My guest today is Nathaniel Raymond. I'm going to have him introduce himself. He's here at Yale. He runs a thing called, I don't even remember. He'll tell you, but it has to do with like humanitarian work. Unfortunately, I have to say it, genocide, tracking humanitarian crises using satellite imagery and data. As you'll see, absolutely fascinating guy. We're going to be talking about a movie this time, exclusively one movie. We've talked about Spike Jonze's Her before with Esther Dyson, but we also talked about a book in that one. This one, we're just going to talk about a movie. I consider movies texts, and so we're going to keep talking about movies on this podcast. We're talking about Francis Ford Coppola's The Conversation. Phenomenal movie made in the string of Godfathers 1, 2. I think it was, I don't know the order, but he made Apocalypse Now, the first two Godfather movies, and The Conversation like all in a row. And he was just batting 1,000 in the 70s. The Conversation is an amazing movie. I don't know where you can watch it. I saw it many years ago. And then as I've been here at Yale, it so happened. I actually mentioned the movie in class because I think it's an interesting movie about, obviously it's about surveillance. If you know anything about it, we'll talk about it. We'll give a recap of it. But it's about how gathering data and information doesn't always tell you the truth or help you understand what's going on. And so I mentioned it in class, and somebody's like, "Oh, they're actually screening that film here at Yale." And so I actually really was very lucky to see it on film. I don't know the details. I'll put a link in the show notes. But apparently, there's a film library here at Yale, and they have a copy of it, or they restored a copy of it. It was a wonderful experience, and so just got to see it recently. Nathaniel's seen the movie a bunch of times, and so we're going to talk about it. So anyway, he's going to barge in the room any minute now. We're going to record it. I'm going to see if I can actually get all this done in one day, and it'll be up. So anyway, Merry Christmas. Thanks for listening. Okay. Nathaniel, welcome to the podcast.
It is truly a pleasure.
So can you introduce yourself? You're an interesting guy.
I'm Nathaniel Raymond, the executive director of the Humanitarian Research Lab at the Yale School of Public Health, where I am a lecturer in epidemiology of microbial disease. And I use satellites and open source data to detect and document attacks on civilians.
Incredible. Now, I'm going to assume that a lot of my listeners are familiar with open source software and that world. And I talk a lot about, even though I say I don't like to talk about open data, we work a lot on open data. Open source data is a different thing. Can you explain it?
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast on not even defining OSINT, open source intelligence, but debating the definition of open source intelligence.
Well, how do you?
How it's commonly defined is information that is publicly or commercially available on the internet or for purchase that can be available to anybody, unlike closed data, which is data collected by intelligence agencies that requires intercept, stealing, or capabilities that are not available to anybody.
Right.
And so we use capabilities that are available to generally anybody, including commercial satellite imagery, but that is fused together with data that's on the internet. So about 2.5 weeks ago, we presented on the floor of the United Nations Security Council the results of our investigation into Putin's abduction and illegal adoption of Ukrainian children. And so what we did with that was access the Russian National Adoption Database. And through that, identified 314 children from Ukraine
Yes.
that had been taken to Russia, and the majority of them have been adopted. The rest have been placed basically with Russian foster parents, and that was based on tracking them through data that was on the internet.
Okay, amazing. And what a nightmare. Um, you sent me a picture of you wearing a tie
Hmm.
speaking at the UN, and I showed it to some people here at the Jackson School, and they were very impressed.
Yeah, they'd never seen me in a tie
Yeah,
before.
very dapper.
Yeah.
It looks, you clean up nice.
It's all airbrushing. Yeah.
So, are you a technologist?
I I don't define myself as a technologist. I define myself as a war crimes investigator and humanitarian aid worker who manages the use of technology.
Okay.
And so I think of myself as playing the orchestra. I have to be an expert in expertise, meaning that I need to know, since I manage a significant amount of people from different areas of technological expertise or analytic expertise. I don't have to know everything about the technologies they work on. I have to know everything about how to put together all the technologies that they work on.
Yeah.
And so I'm a manager um, of technologists, but not a technologist myself. And I've managed the development of algorithms in terms of image classification, feature extraction, and we do a lot of that. And I know what I don't know about those processes, which
Yeah.
is a lot. I know that I know that there are things that I don't understand, and then I hire or partner with people who do. But my job is to understand how it all comes together,
Right.
which
Right.
is a separate skill from the actual technological expertise.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
I'm giving you a pass. You still get to be on the podcast,
Oh,
even if
thank
you
you.
don't consider yourself a technologist.
I'm up to my neck in technologists.
That's yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Great.
yeah.
That counts.
I've fallen into a pit of technologists, and
Yeah.
I've got technologists all, all over everything. But myself, I am not trained as one.
Got it. Fair. I also am not trained as one. We're all posing. That's
Mhm.
fine.
Have you ever met one trained as one?
Oh yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So we're here to talk about the conversation. Um, I tried to get you to come see it with me. Of course, you're too busy. You've got a busy job, and so, but you've seen it many times.
Hmm.
Do you want do you want to give a summary of the movie? I can, but I've
Uh,
seen it more recently. But
yeah. The summary
yeah,
of the movie is Harry Call, who is uh, surveillance expert, specializing in audio surveillance, played by Gene Hackman in one of the great performances of all time. Um, uh, is hired by a uh, man known as the director to uh, follow a couple in Union Square, uh, and they are walking in a circle and having a conversation, the titular conversation of the film, and he basically hears a fragment of that conversation, which is he'd kill us if he had the chance, and uh, Harrison Ford plays the interlocutor between the director and Harry Call, and really the what happens in the movie is Harry thinks that the couple is in danger, when in fact, uh, are we? Do we have to do
it's
spoiler
all
alerts?
spoilers on this podcast.
Okay,
Yes. Yeah.
when in fact it's the director who is killed, and likely by the couple, though it is not fully explained. And really, you can look at this movie as quote a thriller, but really it's a study of the interior life of the surveillance um, of the one doing the surveillance, and it's his descent into paranoia, guilt, and it is unclear as you watch the movie what is happening, what actually
Yeah.
happened,
Yeah. Yeah.
and then, but when you get to the end, you have this paranoid, privacy obsessive surveillance artist who plays the saxophone rips his apartment apart looking for a bug that he can't find, and it ends with this classic shot of him basically in his underwear playing the saxophone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, that was amazing. So you that was a fantastic summary. I mean, there's so much to talk about in this movie. I just want a second that Hackman's performance is unbelievable.
Unbelievable.
Uh, it's so subtle. It's so perfect. It is. I don't know. I like have chills just thinking about the movie. It's so out of time now, and I would say the one thing that really struck me watching it this time is how for us it's hard to imagine that the technology that he was working with in the movie is like the absolute bleeding edge.
Hmm.
Like it's incredible stuff. But this like it's reel to reel tape. Like it's
Hmm.
a lot of like very analog, huge clunky equipment. There's an amazing scene in the movie where it's when he goes to the trade convention for other,
Yeah.
surveillance tech people, and there's like kind of his competitor. He has sort
Hmm.
of like a rival, uh, who he's like, "Hey, take a free pen." Which, like, me watching, I'm like, "What are you doing?" Like, that's obviously a microphone. But apparently, when this movie was made, that was bizarre science fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you could have like a wireless transceiver and a pen. And but the reveal when he finally realizes that, when his rival shows him, he's like, "I've been recording you this whole time." He pulls a reel to reel tape recorder out of his like coat
Yes.
pocket,
Yeah.
and it's like spinning.
It's incredible. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
it's pre-digital,
yeah.
and there's the an incredible element of the movie is how radical Coppola's shooting of the film was to a person now. It doesn't look radical, but if you remember the scene where Harry Call goes into his apartment the first time you see him in his apartment, the camera doesn't move and
Okay.
he goes out of frame and the camera doesn't follow him.
Huh.
This is an extremely studied film school. Part of this is that then it moves on a mechanical gantry to the left and it resets the aperture when he comes in,
Oh wow.
and it moves to the couch. Okay.
Okay.
What Coppola did is he um tried to make the camera work look like Call was being surveilled.
Oh wow.
And so he studied surveillance cameras in terms of designing
Wow.
how he set the camera shots. And so you'll notice throughout the movie, and at the time it was very jarring for 1974 audiences because they had never seen a movie where the camera doesn't track.
Yeah.
It tracks like now, like an iPad camera or an iPhone camera.
Right.
And so to us, it looks entirely normal. That wasn't done in movies. What was done in movies is you go in on the main character and you frame him.
Right.
They never frame him normally.
Oh wow.
And if you
Okay.
rewatch the
Okay.
movie, watch the apartment scene, the
Yeah.
camera sets and Call moves out of frame.
Okay.
And he's in the other room, he's in the kitchen, and the camera doesn't move.
Right.
That was in 1974. No one did that in a movie.
Yeah.
And then Coppola has it looking like a mechanical camera, a robotic camera. It moves left only after Call moves into position. It lags behind him
Interesting.
throughout the whole movie to create that feeling that it is he himself is being surveilled
Right.
by the camera in the movie.
Right. Amazing.
Once you watch it that way,
Yeah.
that you are in a position of surveilling Call.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Did you see Zone of Interest?
No.
You should. It's very relevant
Yep.
to your work as well. But similar
Yeah.
tricks. It's very much kind of like a hidden, like sort of hidden camera type situation.
Mhm.
But these cameras don't even track. It's just sort of like it's a completely static.
Interesting.
camera, and so people walk in, and it's
Like the new Tom Hanks, Robin Wright Zemeckis movie where the camera is just it's one shot the whole time.
oh, I don't know about this.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
they're in a house
okay.
throughout all of history, and the camera doesn't move. There's only one shot in the
Oh,
entire
wow.
movie over in it, but it's over 1,000 years. It did not do well at the
Okay.
box office.
Yeah. Okay. So we've gotten the spoiler out of the way.
Yeah.
I remembered there was this sort of twist, right? Like,
Hmm.
uh, I saw the movie like 20 years ago or something like that, and then I just saw it again a few months ago, but I couldn't remember what the twist was. And so what it is so he's I'm gonna just spoil it even more
Yeah.
for everybody. So
Go all the way.
he's done this job. It's a masterpiece in that
Hmm.
he's been able to record a good amount of this conversation in a very crowded place while the two subjects are moving. Like, this
From
is just like,
four sensors.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, and
Yeah.
he's got people on the ground. He's got people like across the block with like the parabolic thing. I don't know what you call it.
Hmm.
Anyway, so
Yeah,
like,
the parabolic recorder.
yeah.
Yep.
Um and anyway, but he doesn't know a ton about the job, but he does gather. He's like, there's something going on here. Like, there's danger here because of this line. Like, uh, he'd kill us if he had the chance. Is
Hmm.
That's kind of like how it's heard as he's parsing everything together. And he's also haunted. It's revealed by his rival that he used to work in New York or something like that. He did a job, and that job resulted in like a whole family being murdered, like
Three. Yeah.
brutally. And
Hmm.
um, so he's also religious. You know, he's somewhat pious. He's Catholic,
Hmm.
and observant, and like he's really haunted by this and does not want to be responsible for people getting hurt. He even goes and confesses, which
Hmm.
again is sort of submitting himself to be surveilled.
Yep.
Um, and tries to sort of like absolve himself from the
Hmm.
consequences of what he's doing, revealing this information. He's like, I'm just doing my job. Like, what people choose to do with this information, like, that's not my fault, right?
Hmm.
So anyway, he can't, but he cannot. He's too burdened by this.
Hmm.
Um, Fast forward, you realize again, it's not entirely clear exactly what happened, but it was this couple that was planning the murder of the director.
Yes.
Um, and my interpretation of the movie is that Harrison Ford's character, he's in on it. It's a conspiracy
Yes.
to trick this executive guy into believing that his wife
Is
is
having an
is
affair.
having an affair, and basically to get him to sorry to get the big executive guy who gets killed, to get him to confront her and her lover at a hotel room,
Hmm.
where they're actually planning to murder him, which they do.
Yes.
And this is all actually a plot to take over the corporation. Like, she's going to be instated as, the
Yes. Though
executive.
it's never fully
It's never
explained.
fully explained. But the point is like, Hackman is Hackman contrives a story based on what he's observed and what he's heard. What's revealed at the end, like this little twist, is then you hear that snippet of the conversation again, and it's the guy of the couple saying he'd kill us if he had the chance.
Hmm.
And so it's just this minor inflection. It's like, he'd kill us if he had the chance. He'd
Yep.
kill us if he had the chance.
Yep.
And where he's talking her into it, like, we got to go through with this.
Hmm.
Um, and there, I'll let you respond to that. I mean, like, I think I'll let you respond to that in the context of your work, which is remotely observing lots of things and trying to understand what's actually happening.
I deal with this all the time.
Yeah.
I watched it again last night, and it uh it's a I deal with the conversation scenario on a daily basis. We released a report yesterday involving satellite surveillance of Zamzam, internally displaced persons camp in Sudan, which is being shelled by the Rapid Support Forces, um, and also the city of Al Fasher to the north, which was the last safe haven in Darfur, is in the middle of this horrific siege that we've been watching for 6 months. And when you're using satellite imagery, it's like Harry Call with a snippet of a conversation. You're seeing the reflection of light off the earth for a millisecond.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so you see vehicle position,
Yeah.
and you see uh, individuals, crowds of individuals, are they leaving a community? Are they returning to a community? Is the community being attacked by these vehicles, or are these vehicles fleeing the community? And so, um, context and aperture
Yeah.
and all can come together to provide insight,
Yeah.
or to make you absolutely um, deceive yourself. And
Yeah.
so, and I say all the time, new ways of seeing create new ways of being blind. And
Whoa.
and for me, that's been the key thing I've dealt with in a 15-year journey in into surveillance,
Yeah.
into remote surveillance. um, I'm constantly having to say, what are the ways in which my new way of perceiving something is creating a new way of self-deception,
Right.
and a new way of being blind. And at the beginning of like the big techno explosion in the aughts, the innovation boom, everyone's like, what can I do with this? And I was constantly asking the question, because I come at things more as an ethicist than anything else, constantly asking the question of, um, what shouldn't I do with this? What can I do with this that I think I can do with this?
Yeah.
And so it's been limitation based.
Well, yeah. I mean, let's okay. The idea of limitation based, I think, is really interesting because I think that my mind is blown by this phrase: "New ways of seeing create new ways of being blind." Is that
Yes.
right?
Hmm.
In the sense that we can only perceive a few things at a time, and
Yes.
so if we're focused on anything, that's at the exclusion of everything that's not that thing, right?
Hmm. Exactly.
Right? Okay. And so this is my students here, I always feel somewhat like apologetic to them because I,
Hmm.
I would get too philosophical like all the time. But this our class was about data, using data to inform policy, and like the
Hmm.
potential there. But I just started off the class and emphasized throughout. I'm like, data's not telling us that much. Like it's very seductive to believe that like you have some data and therefore you know something. You do know something, but you don't know the whole story.
Well,
Yeah.
let's define data.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, for me, the struggle to define data has been one of the great sort of emotional and moral journeys of my life, to try to get to the
Yeah.
definition of what is data.
Okay.
And I was in a meeting with my team when I was at Harvard directing the Signal program on human security and technology, where a colleague, Dan Scarnecchia, defined data in a sentence, and we all just sort of sat there and was like, oh my lord, that's actually the definition of data. How he defined it, uh, how they defined it at that moment was, um, data is the record of a characteristic.
Okay. Interesting.
And that
Yeah.
that changed my whole life. That one
Yeah.
sentence, because then I stopped seeing data is not information per se.
Yeah. No.
Data is not,
Yeah.
we often, and
Mm.
students do this all the time, they connect data to a technology, like that's phone data, that's
Right. Right.
that's microphone data, that's imagery data. um no, whether you take a stick at the bank of the Euphrates in like 2000 BC
Yeah.
and you draw a mark, or you're downloading information from the Webb Space Telescope, it's all just records of a characteristic.
I like that.
And so
Yeah.
what and so what I try to do is um to move away from the complexity to get to the real complexity, which is um not the complexity about the technology, but the complexity about how do we interpolate different records of characteristics when we are engaged in surveillance,
Yeah.
so that we have something that is stable and safe, because the context in which I collect data
Yeah.
are the most dangerous in the world. And I have been involved in surveillance that has resulted in projects and products that have resulted in harm to people, causal harm.
Yeah.
I have caused harm through my surveillance. And so when I watch the conversation For me, it's like that's a Wednesday.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And calls guilt about kill having been involved in potentially killing people as part of his work. I'm like, oh, I know exactly what that feels like.
yeah.
Yeah, I think I've done that.
Wow. Um, do you want? How do you keep going?
Uh, well, it's not. I keep going because it uh, it those incidents actually compel me to keep going. I'll give you the specific one that happened during with George Clooney during the
Yeah,
Satellite Sentinel project.
yeah.
We saw road construction that was leading into the Cauda Valley, where the Nuba people were being attacked by the Sudan Armed Forces. And this road construction was being done by Chinese road crew workers that were working in Sudan for a Chinese company. And they were building a road we assessed to be tank capable. And so we could see that they were going to be able to run armor on this road into the Cauda Valley. And so we released a report saying that the Sudan Armed Forces with Chinese road crews are building these tank capable roads. And we de identified it as much as possible to prevent any harm to the civilian road crews.
Yeah.
And so we clip latitude and longitude is gone. We degrade the resolution on the image, and we put it out so that if you look at it, you couldn't tell where the people were.
Right.
At the corner of one of the images was a very faint crossroads. And for the Sudan People's Liberation Army North, they knew there was only one crossroad for 200 square kilometers.
Oh, wow.
And they attacked within 36 hours. They
Okay.
attacked the road crews and they kidnapped them. And in the kidnapping of the Chinese, which they were going to use as hostages to stop the barrel bombing of their communities by
Yeah.
SAF, um, some of the Chinese civilians were shot in the crossfire and
Okay.
died. And we inadvertently gave them the intel of their location.
Right.
And so we released a press release saying that the Sudan People's Liberation Army North needs to let these people go. About 48, 72 hours after that, they walked out of the bush to a UN peacekeeping base,
Okay.
but not all of them
Right.
because some had died in the crossfire. And so, um, is that a moment where you stop what you're doing,
Right.
or you take seriously that what you are doing can do
Right.
that?
Right. Well, I mean, this is like somewhat, this is where I get kind of woo woo. And
Yeah.
it's sort of weird that like my time here has sort of
Hmm.
pushed me further down this road, which is that like the human genome and like our species is somehow wired to just want to know as much about everything as possible. Like
Hmm.
I see this reflected in the way that we build technology, the way that we use technology. Like it's just sort of
100%.
a relentless desire to just have more information. And so if you're not going to be doing this carefully and considerately with the I would say the people or the organizations you characterize as good state actors, bad actors, or sorry, good faith actors, bad faith actors will do it anyway. Like I mean,
Hmm.
so the point of being is like there has to be someone doing this in a considered way.
Yeah, but
Because
you
if
will
yeah,
always be a moral hazard.
absolutely, yeah,
Here's the thing:
yeah,
is that
yeah,
even if you do it
yeah,
as best as possible, there will be moral hazard.
yeah,
And people are like, "Oh, you're so heroic for what you do," and um, I hate that word because for multiple reasons. But the big thing is that the hard part of this work is that even if you do it right
yeah,
all the time, there will be casualties
yeah.
and there will be a balance of consequences. And so I use this principle from medical ethics, which guides me all the time, which is nolla tangere, which means unhand them or let them go. And
Oh,
so everyone in ethics says primum non nocere, first do no harm.
right,
But there's a principle that we don't talk about much that precedes that, which means nolla tangere, unhand them, let them go. And so for heart surgery in America was considered nolla tangere until just after World War II. It was considered ethically prohibited.
To intervene that
You
much.
could not touch the heart in
Interesting.
surgery until what was called the blue baby experiment by Blaylock and Thomas at Johns Hopkins, where they corrected a congenital defect that was causing babies to become cyanotic, to become blue.
Okay.
And what the big deal about that procedure, was on the front of Life magazine, is that they touched the heart.
Interesting.
And because they violated the nolla tangere prohibition. And so and now we have heart surgery.
But hold on, explain the nolla tangere.
It,
What the concept is? That
yeah,
there's
there are things you
you just don't
cannot
do.
ethically do
Yeah. Okay.
in medical practice, and they're called nolla tangere,
Got it.
which means that we do not know the harm enough to
Got it.
do no harm,
Got it.
right?
Right.
And
Right.
so in satellite surveillance for civilian protection, we ourselves are having to figure out, where do we have a nolla tangere,
Right.
right? Unhand them. You can't safely do it
Yeah.
to a clinical standard, in that you yourself are giving yourself the clinical standard. And then the other part is, okay, you can do it, but primum non nocere, first do no harm.
Right.
But that's said by technologists all the time about these risky situations. They say, but it happens at conferences. I've been at this with crisis mappers. Like,
Yeah.
before we go forward, we just want to remember, first do no harm. And I'm like, do you know what the harm is? Do you actually know what the harm
Yeah.
is? How can you do no harm if you don't know the harm?
Right.
And so we spend so much time developing technology rather than developing clinical standards of harm scenarios that occur in specific environments.
Right. Right. No, and that's the, I know I've talked about this on this podcast before. Like, there is absolutely an article of faith that motivates a lot of people, technology, that just like more technology is better. I know that my most recent episode with Mark Coatney, we talked about this.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was like sort of the this is like Facebook's
Maximalist.
pitch.
Yeah.
It's just sort of like everyone should be more open and connected. Like, and that's inherently good. We're not sure if that's inherently good.
I'm sure that's not inherently
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly not inherently good. It's
Yeah.
it's a lot of things. And it changes everything.
Yeah.
I mean, sort of to your point, I mean, this is sort of a McLuhan, medium as a message thing, but the new ways of seeing create new ways of blindness as well. Anyway,
And
yeah.
also, and there's this other concept I have related to that line about new ways of seeing create new ways of being blind, and I call it the veil of newness. In that we are often, when we have a new technology, we imbue it with sometimes with certain risks that may or may not exist, and with certain virtues that may or may not exist. And we look at this technology often through this veil
Yeah.
of its newness that prevents us from adequately and accurately seeing how it may affect a specific demographic in a specific context. And so I think about this all the time, back to Facebook, right? The virality algorithms that you deploy in San Francisco to find an LGBT nightclub, those virality mechanisms that are core to the apps, right?
Yeah.
Allow the business model of how this technology was designed to exist.
Right.
Now you put that in Kampala, Uganda.
Yeah.
And that viral algorithm that is the business case,
Yeah.
suddenly the algorithm's not new. The virality is not new. The context is new.
Right.
And you enter that and then it becomes a kill chain for
Right.
hunting LGBTQ people, where in San Francisco, it is how they plan a night out.
Yeah.
Right. And so sometimes the veil of newness is the technology. Sometimes it's the old technology in a new context.
Right.
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 And so you constantly have to be seeing, how am I being blinded by newness, or how am I being blind to newness in how I'm deploying the technology? That in fact, oh, it's fine. We use Facebook here all the time.
Yeah.
You don't use it in Kampala
Yeah.
with the LGBT population, do you?
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's I've seen it happening right now, like with AI. Like a lot of people are like AI is bad. Like there's a backlash to it, right? So and it's fair. There's a lot of hype around it. I
I
don't.
don't even think AI is truly actually a thing, but
Yeah, I
that's
mean,
a
yeah,
separate
yeah, but no,
conversation.
we could. I
Yeah.
think probably see eye to eye on a lot of this.
Yeah.
Like, um, there's highly scaled statistical inference happening,
Yes.
right?
Or super fancy autocorrect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Which it's obviously very compelling to people and everything like that. But like, but the point is, but that's kind of the point. It's compelling to people,
Yeah.
right? So people are like drawn to it. They find it fascinating. Some people find it useful. Um, I use it to help write up budgets. It's great. Like,
Mhm.
but it's the thing is, it's a very silly. I would say it's silly to be like, this is good or bad. It's like, no, this is a new capability that we were introducing into like billions of people. And
Yes.
it's going to change the way it's designed to change how they communicate with each other. Stuff is going to happen if you do that.
Mhm. You give
You
a
might
guy
think some of that stuff is going to be good. You might think some of it's bad, but stuff is going to happen.
yeah,
Yeah.
so well,
Yeah.
let's cut to it.
Yeah.
What is technology? Technology is a way of doing anything.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. I think
And
language is a technology. I mean,
yeah, no, it
yeah.
is.
Yeah.
It is. Like
Yeah.
a doorstop is a technology.
Right.
A ICBM is also a technology. They are just ways of doing something.
Yeah.
Okay. And so like my grandfather when I was a kid was sitting on a stone wall watching my dad push a wheelbarrow.
Yeah.
and my grandfather had a very dry sense of humor, said, "Dick, what are you doing with that wheelbarrow? You don't know anything about technology." And that line
Yeah.
is stuck with me. I was like 7 or
Yeah.
8, and it was meant as a joke,
Yeah.
but there's something very profound in it. A wheelbarrow is a technology,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so the point is that it, we, we need to move away from this modality fixation on like the slinky of the moment
Right.
and start thinking about technologies as ways of doing something, and that specifically information technologies. That people say we're in the information age. No, we are in an information age. There have been information ages since the cuneiform tablet.
Yeah.
And so we are
Yeah.
just now in an information age with ways of doing something, these technologies that are creating both new opportunities and new risks in ways that are mostly accelerating previous risks that already existed.
Yeah. Well, but also I would say creating new risks, creating, actually, to borrow your phrase, creating new forms of blindness.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, gosh, this is
Yes.
mind blowing. Trying to think if we should try to take it back to the movie at all.
Well, I think I think we are talking about
We are, yeah.
we are deeply talking about the movie. Like, let's talk about Harry Call's raincoat.
His raincoat? Oh,
His
yeah, yeah, his
raincoat?
transparent raincoat?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Oh, tell me about it.
that was a specific decision by Coppola to give him a see-through raincoat,
Okay.
and he talks about this a lot.
Yeah,
That
it's semi-opaque. Like,
semi-opaque,
yeah.
and you see, and that's the visual. It repeats throughout the movie when he's in
Yeah.
the phone booth, when he's in the director's office, again and again. You think you're seeing through,
Yeah.
but you're viewing through a surface to a surface.
Man.
Yeah. And so like the the and really, well, what's the conversation about? What is the conversation about, and how does that visual um device with the raincoat relate to it? Which is, you never know what you're actually seeing.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and that there is no objective truth
Yeah.
as you walk out of that movie. I don't actually. Do you know what happened in the conversation?
I have an idea.
You have an
Right.
idea,
Just like he had an idea.
just like he had an idea.
Yeah.
And that's the point of the conversation,
Yeah.
is that you don't actually know. you have a perception of what you think your perception was,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
In my world, that's all I have, which is I'm putting together this mosaic effect, just like Harry Call,
Yeah.
from multiple sensors. Like that moment that
Right.
he's feeding them together, I
Yeah.
just do it with different technology, but I'm doing literally the same thing of like sensor here, and I create this mosaic effect across multiple modalities and
Yeah.
streams of data. Sometimes fire data, sometimes a social media post, sometimes metadata from a video,
Yeah.
and I'm clipping it together just like him. And I can I can basically at the end say, oh, here's what's happening. No, here is what I perceive through my means of perception
Yes.
is happening. And that's all I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's Harry
Right.
Call in the raincoat. You see through it to a surface, you see through the window in the director's office with the telescope to a surface to surface to surface.
Yeah. Amazing. I didn't know that. I mean, I noticed the coat. I was
Yeah.
like, oh, why don't she get a coat like that? It's kind of cool. I got to break to you. Also, we're doing that right now.
Yeah.
I have a sensorium.
Yeah.
You have a sensorium. We've evolved to some point of fitness that we're able to have conversations and perceive one another and not be threatened by one another,
Mm-hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. But like the way we all perceive the world is through a model that's running in our brain to tell us what to focus on and what not to focus on.
Yes.
So like this is again, I think something that I maybe belabored a little bit too much with my students, but I would talk about this is that like the way that we perceive reality is entirely subjective at all times.
Yes.
And so the promise of data, so the idea the promise of records of characteristics, I
Mm-hmm.
think that I'm not going to pull up my laptop to say what my definition was that I shared with the students, but it was something like data is a collection of observed quantifiable facts or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, Something like that. Yeah. So, but the
Let's say observe quantifications.
sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Observe
Yeah.
quantifications. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Putting facts on there sort of gives it a little bit too much weight. I think you're right. So like, the promise of data is the idea that we can have a sensor that is I will say the sensor is not neutral. The sensor's been
There is
designed.
no
There's
neutral
no
sense.
neutral sensor, but it's a sensor that like it is engineered and designed to be consistent in a certain way that we think we can understand.
Yes.
And so
Standardized.
it's standardized. And so yeah, so that we can all gather around that and be like, okay, we understand what's happening
Mm-hmm.
here. But again, man, I love this like new ways of seeing create new ways of being blind. The opening shot of the movie, where it's this wonderful, it's like super wide angle. I don't know where they're filming it from, the top of a building or something like that, of Union Square in San Francisco, and all the noise.
Mm-hmm.
There's a band playing, there's conversation, there's
It
dogs.
starts with a saxophone.
Yeah,
And it
and
ends with a saxophone.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The
And I don't think that's a coincidence.
the
Yeah.
70s, they love saxophones back
Yeah.
then. But but it's this very long, slow zoom in on, I guess, the couple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and eventually everything else is blocked out, and you're focused just on this small thing.
You hear that digital sound.
That's right. Yeah, this is great sound.
That was
Yeah.
Walter Murch. Was
Okay.
the sound editor and the
Was it
movie
Munch?
editor. Murch,
Is it Munch?
Merch,
Okay.
who also did a little movie called The Godfather, which
Yeah.
was right before this. This was sandwiched between Godfather 1 and Godfather 2.
Yeah.
And so Murch, he's the greatest sound editor and visual editor in movie history. Like everyone considers him the GOAT. But I love the sound design at the beginning when you have a microphone that you think is a sniper rifle,
Yeah.
and that is intentional.
Yeah.
And then you zoom in on the couple and you're hearing those digital noises.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're doing the physical aperture. So back to the surveillance camera style.
Yeah.
It moves, it pans,
Yeah.
right? It sets, and then it tracks,
Yeah.
right? And then the sound's doing the same thing.
Yeah.
It's panning, fixing on target, zooming in.
Yeah.
And you hear that in Murch's design,
Yeah.
and so for me, like it's a very this is the 50th anniversary of the conversation. The process
That's
of
right.
surveillance is the same. The process is the same. Is you're at the wide angle,
Yes.
and then you're making decisions about how you zoom in,
Yeah.
and it's the OODA loop.
Yeah.
Observe, orient, decide, act.
Yeah.
And so, but for those of us who are in surveillance, we are in the OO.
Yeah.
Observe, orient, observe, orient, observe, orient.
Yeah.
And we're constantly doing these mini OODA loops within that of resetting our our aperture
Yeah. Yeah.
and resetting our target.
Yeah.
And we're doing that over and over and over again. And the technologies we have now allow us to do it faster and
Yeah.
sometimes smarter and sometimes a lot dumber.
Yeah. Well, a lot dumber, or in any event, so I've got a little train wreck in my head right now because I gave this talk last week called Internet Power here, where
Hmm.
I made the case that the big tech companies are a new kind of non-state actor, and like lots of ink has been spilled on this idea that tech companies are 800-pound gorillas or whatever the term is, that we have to contend with. But the point I was trying to make is that like the title of the talk was a real riff on like air power, sea power,
Hmm.
there's internet power. Like if you can control massive quantities of data in what is it, records of characteristics, or like
Hmm.
about entire populations, you can start controlling those populations.
Without
you
a doubt.
you are governing them. and
Hmm.
so and so my definition of governance in this case was like steering people's behavior, which is I shared a draft of my talk with my mom. She's like, the word governance comes from the Greek term to steer,
Hmm.
uh, which actually it's kubern, which Kubernetes
Interesting.
is also comes from. So anyway, um, so you can steer populations this way.
Hmm.
And I've been thinking about the OODA loop in the sense that I'm like, all right, if these big tech companies are governing organizations, like we need to understand like how did they work? Like what what is their like functionally, how do these organizations work? How do they reward people? How do they decide what to do? And I do think the OODA loop has been identified by a lot of people as being like core to how like Silicon Valley does what it does.
Hmm.
And I think it's a huge differentiator between, I would say, public sector actors or many state actors, is that they cannot receive and respond to information fast enough.
Hmm.
They just don't. They just don't receive information.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's actually it's so galling that to me sometimes, that like the way that we receive information about how to govern the whole
Hmm.
country is through voting.
Hmm.
It's like every 4 years, for at least for the president, will be like, "What do you all think is good or bad?" And then we're
Hmm.
like, "Okay, great, we're going to change our behavior accordingly."
Hmm.
Puts another executive in
Elections,
charge.
elections are part of a noodle
It's
loop.
a noodle loop. It's a
Yeah.
very slow OODA loop with a terrible data gathering process.
But now technology companies are part of our societal OODA loops
Yeah.
in 2016 to 2024. And we don't fully understand
No.
how they are, and we don't fully and to your point about um we don't have standard requirements for data collection about the data collectors.
No. Yeah.
And so like at the end of the day, I mean, the world that the conversation was created in 50 years ago
Yeah.
um, was worried that we were going to enter the world we live in now,
Yeah.
and we do.
Yes. Yeah.
And so the paranoia at the heart of the conversation,
Yeah.
let us say this very clearly, is that we would enter a world from San Francisco.
Oh wow. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
No, that was just a coincidence, but that we would enter a world um, in which we would be mediated
Mhm.
by technological perception
Yeah.
to the degree that, in fact, we are now mediated
Right.
by technology based perception.
Yeah. No, and it ends this harrowing ending of of him in his underwear playing the saxophone.
Well, we need to talk about the thing before that, which is the iconic scene of the movie, which is the toilet.
Oh, with the blood.
Hmm.
Oh, we should talk about that.
Yeah.
But let me just quickly, just on this point though, is
Yeah.
that like the world that we live in. I mean, that's sort of the movie ends with it. Sort of, he knows he's being surveilled. He doesn't understand how,
Yes.
and it it just breaks his brain, right? And
Yes.
like we now live in, we just take it for granted, I guess, that we're being surveilled constantly somehow by, there are cameras
Yeah.
everywhere. We voluntarily carry our phones that surveil us in a lot of
Yeah.
different ways. But it has changed what it means to be human in a way that we can't understand.
Absolutely.
It's just the water that we're in.
Francis Ford Coppola
Water
did
that,
an interview with Terry Gross on Fresh Air, and he revealed that the way he writes screenplays is he tries to define the whole movie by one word. And so
whoa.
then he and Terry Gross were going back and forth where Terry was trying to guess what the one word was for each of the movies. And they get to
Okay.
the conversation, and that's the only one she got.
What was it?
Privacy.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
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 And she said, your one word for the screenplay was privacy. And he was like, yes.
Interesting.
But for The Godfather, she said, family. And he said, no, it was secession.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
Oh,
so
that's great.
yeah, and so and so
Okay.
the Coppola's one word when he wrote the screenplay was privacy,
Yeah.
and it was a movie about privacy. And you watch the making of the conversation that Coppola did at the time. They recorded Hackman and Coppola working together and
Oh,
setting the
really? I haven't
scenes.
seen it.
Oh
Okay.
yes, you can see it
Yeah.
on YouTube.
Okay.
And that you watch the two of them debating how to do the bench scene with uh, John Cazale, greatest actor of the 1970s,
Yeah.
was Stanley. But like the scene where you see him doing his tray craft, there's this
Yeah.
great thing where you can watch him and Francis Ford Coppola, Hackman, Cazale, and Coppola setting those scenes up
Yeah.
on how they're going to present the technology to the audience,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And they knew at that moment that they were introducing America to something that there what really wasn't
Yeah. No one knew
fluency.
about it.
No
Yeah.
one
Yeah.
really knew about it.
Yeah.
But you could also get a sense by watching behind the scenes that the Coppola and the actors he was working with knew that they were introducing America to like a new America that was coming. You have to
Yeah.
understand, this is at the time of Watergate. This is at the
Right.
time of
Right.
Church Commission. This is at the time of the revelation of MK Ultra,
Yeah.
right? And COINTELPRO. It was the sine qua non movie of paranoia, new Hollywood movie of the 70s
Yeah.
that invented the genre, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
and they were aware of that.
Right.
And you see that
Oh
as
man,
they're making the movie.
these guys just doing stuff. Okay, so let's talk about the blood scene because this is.
Yeah.
I'll just again spoil it further. He goes to the hotel. He gets the room next to the room that is mentioned in the recording
Or he
that they
thinks
have.
the couple's going to get killed
So
by the director.
yeah, so he's there to kind of like listen in,
Mhm.
maybe intervene or something like that. But he's just kind of going crazy.
Yes.
Um, he falls asleep or something. Something
Maybe.
happens. We
Yeah.
like this is where it really starts to go kind of off the rails, and I can't tell if anything that he's seeing is real or not.
I think that's the point.
Okay, so yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah,
think that's entirely the point. So
okay,
he goes into the bathroom and he flushes the toilet,
yeah,
and suddenly blood starts coming out of the toilet.
yeah,
And the look on Hackman's face
yeah,
of such sheer horror, that is the reveal moment of the movie. And I think about the toilet with the blood coming out of it all the time.
I don't.
Yeah, well, no,
Yeah,
in terms of my work in monitoring crises, like
yeah,
I had a moment where we were watching in 2011 7,000 people trying to get into a UN peacekeeping compound, and clouds came over,
oh,
and we lost sight. And when the clouds parted during the rainy season,
yeah,
they were all gone, and three large mass graves appeared to the south of the town, each the size of a soccer field. And in it were the people who were trying to get into the peacekeeping base, and they were taken.
yeah,
They were all killed. And so for me, when I look at the bloody toilet, that moment where Call is having that visceral
right,
experience of the tactile consequences
yeah, in his face,
in his
rush, yeah,
face.
yeah,
Yeah. And what's important is this mundane moment.
right,
And it's this mundane thing. He flushes the toilet,
Yeah.
and suddenly it is pure horror.
Yeah.
And that's the thing about, doing this work, is that you're constantly flushing the toilet and blood's coming out.
Yeah.
Like we watch people die from space all the time.
Yeah.
In the case of the town of El Janena, we were able to navigate, to orienteer throughout the city during the killing that happened last year, by piles of bodies that were so high we could
It's
navigate off them,
the
and we would
shadow.
mark that's body pile 1,
Yeah.
body pile 2, and we were using that as data to be able to conduct surveillance, and we were actually surveilling the movement of the bodies.
Oh my gosh.
And so, like, when I see Call have that moment of horror,
Yeah.
of both what his surveillance may have done,
Right.
what his surveillance is surveilling, all of that,
Right.
um, that feels entirely real to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is again, something I've been thinking about a lot recently is just the unfortunate fact that a lot of people would prefer not to be true is that we're a violent animal, that we always have been. And so I would say I've lived a very privileged life in, the United States for most of my life, where we've mostly figured this out. Like where we live in relative peace compared to most of human history. This idea of having a democratically elected government that has largely some kind of monopoly on violence helps a lot. But that's not the way the world is. That's not what humans have. It's not. It's just like this is a blip historically in terms of like how humans have organized themselves. You're taking this very huge, very wide aperture, seeing a lot of the world, and it's a violent world in certain.
What
Yeah.
Steven Pinker, from Harvard, had
Yeah.
this thing where he was saying, everyone's so negative. Violence is going down. And this was like in the
Yeah.
2010s.
Yeah.
And he was using the Red Cross data and ACLED data
Yeah.
to say violence was declining.
Yeah.
Okay, that curve, the Pinker curve, we'll call it, that
Yeah.
he saw was real. And there was a period from about 2000 into, I would say, probably about 2015, depending on how you measure it, where global war and global incidents of violence declined. The Pinker curve is now inverted, and violence is going up, and violence will continue to go up. We are entering a more and more violent world,
Hmm.
year by year, and for reasons that have massive causal drivers. And surveillance, and what was once largely the province, solely the province of states, uh,
Right.
and now we have this, both on one hand, you could say, a democratization of surveillance.
Right.
You also have this collision of surveillances, and
Right.
and so I call this the emerging terrain we're in now, an increasingly violent terrain. I call it the social digital terrain, and really
Yeah.
we're monitoring this sort of intersection of information about information,
Yeah.
sensors, and then societal dynamics, and
Right.
the digital output of that is what we are watching to make
Yeah.
predictive decisions, or
Well,
predictive analytic basis.
right. I mean, I think this kind of like it makes me think about this. What I've started calling the data delusion,
Hmm.
which is that if we only knew more, then we would know what to do. If we had the
No.
information, then we would know what to do. That's just not true. Like
Yeah,
it's never
that's really
true.
well said.
Um,
As
and
if mo data, mo problems.
it's true. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, like, and then there's this, gosh, what's this other thought? Oh yeah. So this is I'm curious to get your response to this. This is a mean thought exercise that I've made people do before. Oh gosh, we're at time.
No,
Okay.
we're good.
We'll wrap it up
Keep
though.
going. Keep
We'll,
going.
we'll end on this one, which is I had a roommate when I was in grad school, and he's like Southern California Christian. I don't know if you
Hmm.
know this, like I love whatever. I'm not like against religions or anything like that, but like very sort of like rosy, like let's go do a mission trip in Africa and like help
Hmm.
people in Africa and everything like that. And I was like, hey, like we did a really good job of reducing child mortality in Africa, like in the 80s or something like that. We did that without putting in like rule of law or an education system or a financial system or all sorts of other things. And one of the effects of reducing child mortality was a surplus of children that could be conscripted into wars. Was it good to reduce child mortality if we have an entire populate the entire generation that's just being conscripted into horrific wars?
Absolutely.
Yeah, we want more humans. I think I mean the this is I still think this is a conundrum. I mean, I would say like I would definitely say it's good to reduce child mortality,
Well,
but
for me, it's not a conundrum. It's a question of rights. Each of those children have a right to live,
yeah,
and and rights can only be secured through functioning institutions. And so we can.
right.
It is not a conflict to say we must secure the rights of the individual by creating state-based means for those rights to be secured. For me, that is not a conflict.
But I would say this goes back to this. Is it non legere? Non legere?
Nola Tengere.
No latengere. What is not? I was like making up Latin. No latengere.
Nom de guerre means name of war,
Nom de
but
guerre. I
yeah,
said non legere, which who knows? I'm just
I
making
do
stuff up.
not know what that
Okay,
means.
that's like fake Latin. So no latengere.
Hmm.
I guess my point here though is yeah, this is what I guess I want your response to is that like maybe we shouldn't intervene. Maybe we shouldn't be so confident that we should go into a place and be like, we're going to fix things by doing this thing because this is a good thing to do because
Well,
we're interacting with a very complex system.
the question is who's the we?
Right.
And at the end of the day, um, we as in those from the north with privilege,
Yeah.
often Yale male and pale privilege. Yeah. um, we shouldn't be doing anything, um, uh, except when we are supporting building local capacity.
Agreed.
And yeah, and
100%.
so for me right now with Sudan, we're supporting um those who are on the ground inside the kill box right now. And so what we the point is that you cannot, when we're talking specifically about surveillance for good,
Right. Right.
which is a phrase I hate, but I'm using it specifically to 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 have it out there in all its ugliness. Um, it, you need to be with a mandate that comes from the people who are at risk,
Yeah.
and it must emanate from them. It must be for them, about them, from them.
Yeah.
And it is when it is imposed upon
Right.
them, and we are getting to we and them.
Right.
That if you're not clear on the pronouns,
Yeah.
right,
Like
then
who's doing what?
yeah, then you got a problem, and you're probably doing something that's data colonial.
Yeah. 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 It has to do like pronouns and passive voice are like indicators here. Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I would the way I characterize our work at Radiant Earth. I mean, and this is the mission of Radiant Earth is to increase shared understanding of our world.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, all I want us to be able to do is to improve access to data, make it cheaper and easier to work with data, so that more people can have a shared understanding of like what's going on,
Hundred
and
percent.
that's it. I stay out of interventions, which makes it hard for me often to talk to philanthropists because they're like,
Mm-hmm.
"How many babies did you save?" And I'm like, "That's not my job. I'm not the one who's going to decide what communities should be doing for themselves. I want to give them more records of characteristics that they can use to like understand like what works and what doesn't work."
But that must
Yeah.
also occur with uh, combined with increasing the equitable access to expertise,
Yep.
the equitable access to the ability to access the means to process,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so if like we think about Marxism in the 20th century, which is like uh, the proletariat must control the means of production. Um, Now, I would say the affected populations must control the means of processing and release.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. That's
and
exactly right.
and
Yeah.
that's the revolutionary statement now is you must control the means of data collection, analysis, processing, and release. That is about you.
That's exactly right.
That
Yeah.
yeah
And I think, I mean, I've watched many sort of like climate tech startups,
yeah
just fail. And largely, I mean, the conclusion I've come to is that any sort of like environmental regulation or intervention that's, impacting the climate or the environment broadly should be done locally. I don't understand water rights in southern Vietnam.
hmm
I should not be making decisions about that, nor should I assume that I can produce some sort of like SaaS application that's going to tell everyone in the world what they need to know about, their community.
but those
Yeah.
affected people should be able to access that.
Well, they should. I'm saying is that
Exactly.
like
Yeah.
so people are like, well, so like, what's the solution? I'm like, the solution is like millions of apps that millions of people make. Like, um, but
I have an
I think we,
entirely different view,
yeah, okay, go
which
on.
is I think the view is about node centralization of institutional capacities available to marginalized populations, like National Weather Services, but related to conflict.
Yeah,
National Weather Service
yeah.
related to climate. It like they don't need to own all of the means of
No, I
understanding.
agree with
They
that.
need to have the insights equitably available to them.
Yes.
And in our democracy, for the moment, we have things like National Weather Service. We have things that produce a common, and this goes back to the conversation, a common shared factual understanding from data science and method
Yes.
of how we are going to view reality.
Yeah.
Right. and that's that back to what we were saying before on standardization. um, that's what I think limit low income, middle income, and
Yeah.
vulnerable edge settings need those similar means of common version creation
Yes.
based on scientifically proven method and fact.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I think we're agreeing with
We're
each other.
100%.
Yeah. Um, I'm not going to belabor this anymore. I know you got to go. It's the holidays.
And we've also fixed everything.
No, we fix nothing on this podcast. It's like all I do is like bring people in. We open up like 100 cans of worms, and we're like,
And then
thanks
we
for listening.
walk away from
Yeah.
the worms. Yeah. Like, and it's brought to you by Squarespace.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think so. Here's the takeaway for people listening to this: watch the conversation.
Yes.
It very rarely does a movie age well. Okay, very rarely does a movie become more relevant as time goes on, and it's 50 years later.
Yeah.
And the conversation is probably more relevant than when it was released.
Yeah. It's amazing because again, on its face when it came out, it was like, this is a movie about cool gadgets and technology.
Mm-hmm.
It is about those things, and absolutely not. It is like the perfect movie for this podcast.
I'll tell you what it is. It's the history of the future.
Ooh.
That's the conversation is
Yeah.
a historical view of the future we now inhabit.
Man, he nailed it. We got to get Coppola to listen to this.
Let's call him.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, man.
yeah.
All right. That was amazing. I don't think I need to say anything else about that. Absolutely loved it. I'm going to post this probably without listening to it again. Don't know how I'm going to do the show notes. I'll try to remember a lot of the stuff that we talked about there, but as that was just fantastic. So grateful to Nathaniel for making it out. And doing this is my last day at Yale. So I'm saying goodbye to this place. This is a great note to end on, and a great episode to end the year with. I mean, despite the absolutely crushingly hard to think about subject matter. Really was a phenomenal episode. I'm so grateful to everyone who's listened this year, who's tuned in. This project has just shocked me with how much I like it and like doing it. And it just makes me so happy to know that people are out there listening to it. So I wish everybody a very happy holiday season. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe. And thanks also to Secret School, my good friend in Seattle, who I'm excited to go back and hang out with again, for making the intro music for this podcast. And thanks to We for the song 3/10 of the Population, which they let me use to end this thing. And anyway, I just thank you so much. Thank you. I will be back next month with the great Gina Trapani. We're going to be talking about the book Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Is that what it's called? It's called Tomorrow. I don't remember. I think it's called Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Whatever. I'll put it in the show notes. I hope to hear from you, or I hope that you will be hearing me in a month. Happy holidays.